My name is Baman Mirsha. I'm Dean, College of Management. Welcome to the second executive to executive event of this year. Before I give the floor to our distinguished president, I would like first of all to recognize a few individuals here. One of them is the individual who actually started this event, Mr. Dennis Flanders. Dennis, can you please stand up? Dennis is a member of College of Management Advisory Board, and of course, here we have our provost, Dr. Maria Vaz. I have been with Lawrence Technological University for almost 2.5 years. I take this opportunity to say a few things about College of Management. It is the second oldest college in this institution. Actually, the founding dean's wife, Catherine, Lawrence Grafey, is the one who was paying faculty in the first couple of years. So if you didn't know about the fact that this technological institution has a College of Management, yes, we have been here since 1932. We offer an MBA program. We offer a Master of Science in Information Technology. We have an undergraduate degree program which gives the students the option of concentrating in accounting, finance, management, marketing. And also we have an undergraduate degree in information technology. And finally, last semester, our enrollment increased by 50%. The college has approximately 600 students. So we are not the most important college, in my opinion. We are one of the most important units within your College of Management, at Lawrence Technological University. Now it is my distinct pleasure to introduce to you our President Modgin. Please.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning. I know the coffee probably wasn't hot. Good morning again, and very great pleasure to welcome you. Many of our friends and colleagues have been here for the first time on the previous lecture, and I hope we will continue to engage ourselves in this great platform-oriented discussion about the leaders of our community in business and management. The topic today is achieving outcome through continuous improvements is so relevant to what we do at Lawrence Tech. Many of you know, and I may be repeating, and I forgive my repetition of what I said earlier, that we started in 1932. Edsel and Henry Ford gave us opportunity to work and initiate our institution called LIT, Lawrence Institute of Technology, at the Model T plant on Woodward in Highland Park. That's where we started because Mr. Ford wanted the graduates to be learners not only of theory, but of practice, that they must practice what they learn, whether it's engineering or business. So that's how we started. And in 1955, we located here, and there was only one building. And that brings us to home the topic of the day, continuous improvement. Times were tough. Most of the students were people who work during the day, and they came in the evening to take classes to improve their academic credentials and know-how. And at that time, we had just one building, and because there was no student life, but there were workers who came, took classes, and left. But we have improved with time, not only broaden our perspective and what we are offered to the community and our students, engineering, architecture, business management, College of Arts and Sciences, we have life sciences, biomedical engineering, health, IT is very important to us because as business go up and down in our area, based on automotives, how they do, we have a cyclic, many of you know that our economy is cyclic, and some programs go up and down with time. But healthcare will probably never do that, because if you're healthy, you want to remain healthy. If you're sick, you want to get healthy. So I think that is something that is almost uniformly needed all the time. So we want to do something that relates to our expertise in engineering and have biomedical engineering, which is a very sought-after program on campus, and look at other areas. Health IT is already in the management. If we can be using our expertise in engineering and other areas to work with the health community to offer a program that a hallmark of Lawrence Tech theory and practice. Right now, as we say, continuous improvement. From one building, we had another. Now we have, you can see, the campus is very beautiful. We continues to not sit on our laurels, but continues to improve both technology and offerings. As we speak, we have 3 buildings in the making, one right on the other side of this building. That's a Taubman complex, which will house our STEM center. That'll be the first physical building for STEM center in the state. And that is being put together by a $20 million grant or donation from an alum. Then we have participation in the Renaissance of Detroit on Woodward, Midtown, by Willis, next to McDonald. You see a beautiful building, which will be the Lawrence Tech Design Center, which will help in urban planning in the city. And our students are already engaged there in 4 different studios working in urban planning. And then we have across the street from here, within the campus, the new housing unit coming up, because we have a tremendous demand, both from local, out-of-state, and foreign students to live on campus, to create more campus life for our students. I think all this is going on, which is so much in line with the topic of the day, which is a continuous improvement. And never look back, but keep going forward. And we are in line with that, and we're very happy you're here this morning, and I hope we will continue to visit and use this platform to interchange information with the leaders of the business community. We're happy that you're here again. Welcome and enjoy. Thank you.
Morning, everyone. How are you? So welcome, and we're really glad that you can be here today for the Executive Series sponsored by Plant Moran. Before we get started, I do want to mention our other partners, United Way for Southeastern Michigan, the McGregor Fund, Dennis Blender and Blender Consulting, and Michigan Nonprofit Association. So we appreciate them as well and their sponsorship. I have the pleasure of introducing our speaker today. I know it's going to be a very interesting topic. Samuel Flanders. Dr. Flanders is the Senior Vice President, Chief Quality and Safety Officer for Beaumont Health. You may have read a little bit about the merger that's taken place in Cranes and seen his name in there. In his role currently, he oversees quality and safety across the entire organization with an emphasis on providing high-quality care and a safe environment to Beaumont's patient. We were talking beforehand how that works, and I think maybe you could ask that question. How's it working? You've got one organization, now 3 coming together. How does that all work? It was interesting, some of the comments he had. He's led this quality, safety, and clinical effectiveness for Beaumont Health since 2008. He's a pediatrician by training, has more than 20 years experience in hospital quality and safety. Before Beaumont, he was Vice President of Medical Quality at Clarion Health Partners, which is now Indiana University Health. There he did benchmarking, project management tools to track quality, designed and taught performance improvement to employees, and created tools to standardize and improve the safety and efficacy of medication administration. He got his bachelor's degree from the University of Michigan, and he was at the University of Illinois College of Medicine and completed his residency at Methodist Hospital of Indiana. From a nonprofit side, he co-founded the Diabetes Youth Foundation of Indiana, and he was the president of that from 2005 through 2012. He's also a clinical associate professor in the Department of Pediatrics at Oakland University, William Beaumont School of Medicine. And last but not least, he is the current chairperson of the board of Easter Seals of Michigan. So if you would welcome me and join me in welcoming Dr. Flanders.
Thank you, John. Well, good morning, everyone. Good morning. Thanks so much for having me today. to talk about my favorite topic, which is quality improvement and ways to do that. And I know most of you are probably not in the healthcare field, but I'll do my best to make this relate to your field as well, because I think we actually steal a lot of our quality improvement ways from industry. A lot of it doesn't come from healthcare. So I'm calling this, achieving outcomes through continuous quality improvement, sweating the small stuff. I'm going to explain that last comment here later, okay, not right at the beginning, sweating the small stuff. So see if you can relate to any of these challenges. These are some of the challenges that we have in healthcare quality improvement. Our patients are getting sicker and sicker. When I was in medical training, we used to have patients in the hospital basically having routine physicals done in the hospital. That doesn't happen anymore. The intensity is so much higher than it was before, and the requirements for keeping people safe and delivering higher quality care increase every single year. We have more than 2,000 quality metrics at Beaumont that we have to worry about across all of our hospitals, acute care, and ambulatory settings. So it's quite a job, very, very big job. A job that's really impossible to do from a seat in corporate headquarters. As you'll see, it has to involve people on the front lines. Scarce resources. No one enjoys the ever-increasing costs of healthcare, as they go up every year. We're trying to limit those, and so our resources are really limited. Our payments are reducing year after year, and we have to earn more, actually, in terms of being able to do better with quality. We have to be able to go faster. This is a very embarrassing statistic for my industry, but on average, from the time that something is proven to be really good patient care, it takes about 17 years before it's universally adopted across the entire healthcare landscape nationwide. To me, that's kind of embarrassing. We have to pick up that pace. That's way too slow. And then finally, there's no way that we can do all of this without engaging the frontline staff in the work that we're doing. We have to also do that, though, without slowing the pace of production, because the work has to go on. So those are some of our challenges. Hopefully you can identify with at least some of those. I'm going to cover 4 areas of quality and safety improvement today: vision, culture, data, and continuous daily improvement. And I'll touch on each of them one at a time and just kind of give you a little brief synopsis of each one. I want to start with vision because I think it's the most important thing. You have to have a vision of where you're going to be able to get somewhere. And to describe to you at least my vision of where we need to go with healthcare quality and safety, I want to tell you 2 quick stories. One of these you may have heard before. The other one you probably haven't heard before. So I'll tell you the one you might have heard before first. And the story goes like this. The year was 1969, and there were a group of reporters at NASA headquarters in Houston, Texas. And they were there because there was a lot of excitement brewing. As you remember, back in that time, that was when the first moonshot was about to take place. So the reporters were milling around. They didn't have a lot to do. They were waiting for some NASA officials to arrive. And they saw a janitor pushing a broom over in the corner of the room. And they thought, you know what, let's just shoot some B footage just to have on hand. And so they took their cameras and they went up to the janitor and they put a microphone in his face. And they said to him, excuse me, what's your job at NASA? And the janitor looked up, stared into the camera, and said, my job is to put a man on the moon. And then he pushed his broom and he was on his way. So think about that. Think about the engagement of that individual, that very frontline individual, and how he bought into the mission that they were about to accomplish, as if he were going to be the one to fly in the first moon rocket. And then let me combine that with a second, somewhat different story. And this is kind of a strange one, so bear with me, but it's about a toothpaste factory. And this story goes like this. The CEO of the toothpaste factory was beside himself, very, very upset because they were having quality problems in the factory. And the problem was that they were shipping empty tubes. As you know, toothpaste comes in a little squeeze tube, but it's packaged in a cardboard box. And as they go through the whole process of manufacturing the toothpaste and boxing it, and then they bundle all the boxes, some of the boxes, not a lot, but enough to really anger his customers, were empty when they shipped out to the various stores where they were sold. This had been going on for a while. They tried to fix it, hadn't been successful. They were losing market share. Their profits were dropping. So they assembled a group of leaders at the toothpaste factory, and what they decided was, our quality department is really overwhelmed right now. Let's bid this out. Let's get somebody in here and help us to solve that problem. And so they did that. They put out an RFP. They got a bunch of responses, and they were very happy. It took them a few months to select the vendor, but they got a great proposal. It was only a $5 million project, and the vendor came in, And basically what they did was they analyzed the problem and realized it was very difficult to always have a tube of toothpaste drop into every box. Almost impossible to limit that. But what they ended up doing was on the conveyor belt, right before the toothpaste tubes were bundled, as the little cardboard boxes came down the belt, they installed a very sensitive microelectronic scale. And what the scale would do is it would weigh the box, and if the box was empty, the line would stop, a bell and a buzzer would go up, and someone could come over, and they could remove the tube, and then everything could go on. And so they paid their money, the solution was in place, and the team was ecstatic. The next week, there were no defects, and everything was going really well. So about a few weeks after that, and their market share started to pick up, their customers were happy. A few weeks later, the CEO decided to run a report to see how often the micro scales were picking up the empty toothpaste tubes. So he ran this report, and it showed for the first few days it was picking up quite a few of these tubes, and then it just suddenly stopped. And there were no empty tubes being picked up by the scales, and he couldn't understand it. He said to his IT department, "Run it again, there's got to be an error in this report." They ran it again, same result. So the CEO goes down to the factory floor, and he goes to the area where the scales are installed, and his eyes get really, really big, because a few feet before the scales on the conveyor belt, what he sees is a $20 desk fan blowing across the line and a trash can on the other side full of empty tubes. And he goes to one of the workers on the line and he says, "What is this?" And he says, "Oh, the fan, Joe put that there. He got tired of going over and having to, reset the line all the time." So think about these two things together. Think about if all of the people that we worked with were as engaged as the janitor and had the ability and the problem-solving skills to be able to do frontline improvements every day, as in the toothpaste factory. And that's my vision of an excellent organization. I think that would be unstoppable if you could get to that. So how do you get there, though? That's the thing. There's not really a roadmap that's out there, a follow ABC to do that. I'm going to show you how we're trying to get there at Beaumont. There is a little bit of help out there that can sort of help us. This was a study that was published by a group called the University Health System Consortium, which is a group of large academic medical centers across the country. It's big places like Johns Hopkins, University of Michigan. Beaumont's a member of this as well. And what they did was they did a study, and they have data on all of our performance in quality and safety. And they ran our various data points, and then they sent teams of people out to high-performing organizations and some of them that were sort of middle-performing organizations to see what the differences were. And their conclusions were that there were some very distinctive leadership behaviors that were associated with the higher-performing organizations in terms of quality and safety. And they could definitely tell them apart. And these were some of the things, and we don't have time to go into them in great detail, but you can see some of these things like hands-on leadership style. There was a story in one of the organizations where when the valet parking was getting backed up one day and patients were getting angry, the CEO came down and started parking cars herself. Things like that, things that brought people out of their executive offices down to the front lines to help. Accountability, focus on results. See this little cartoon in the lower right, one of our leaders, kind of a new leader at one of our hospitals who's having great success in his area, sent this, the difference between a boss and a leader. See that? I really like that a lot. The leader's out there pulling along with the folks on the front line. The boss is commanding from up above. So these were some of the characteristics that they saw of the organizations that were doing better than the others. So that's just a little bit about vision, frontline focused, people being really engaged. I'd like to talk next about culture, which I think is an incredibly important part of this journey as well. This is a definition of culture that I like. The part I really like about this, it's been described as how an organization behaves when no one is watching. Okay? We call it safety culture in healthcare. And this is really the way that safety is perceived. Do people perceive that they have an environment where it is safe, where they're able to do their job, they have the tools that they need, they're able to speak up if they see something that may not be what they think it should be, and they're not worried about retribution or getting shot down and those sorts of things. A couple of recent examples I think we're all familiar with, that hopefully we can learn from, but General Motors and the Veterans Administration have both had some issues recently, in regard to this culture of safety, this culture of speaking up. General Motors, of course, with the ignition switch. I think I just read in the paper that the death toll has risen to around 50 people now. And one of the things that they did in their corporate language is they really discouraged people from describing problems. They sort of used euphemisms like, instead of saying defect, say, does not perform to design. Now, there was kind of a reluctance to call out the problems. A great example of where this went really well was when Alan Mullally came to Ford here a number of years ago, and the story, as I have heard it told, is that he was in one of his first big meetings with his team, and all of their indicators were green. All of their performance indicators were green, but yet they were losing lots and lots of money, and they were losing market share. And he said, how can they all be green when you're losing all of this money and all of this market share? And finally, one of the executives, who I believe was Mark Fields, who now is the CEO of Ford, had the courage to stand up and talk about a problem that they were having, and he got a standing ovation from Alan Mullally. And that set the tone for the future for being able to call out problems. And this is incredibly important no matter what field that we're in which the people that are working with us feel comfortable speaking up. Imagine an operating room where a nurse in the operating room notices something that could go wrong. If they're not comfortable speaking up and telling the surgeon that, something could happen to the patient. So this is a very, very important part of any safety program. And then, of course, the Veterans Administration. So now within healthcare, this article was called Friendly Fire, Death, Delay, and Dismay at the VA. And it was the same sort of thing. There were systemic issues. People knew that there were problems, but there was a culture of not speaking up. There was a culture of rewarding pieces and parts of the performance, but not the overall performance. So they were focused on a narrow set of metrics, and it led to a significant delay in care for some patients. So this is what I think are really some important characteristics of a strong safety culture, that it's open, as I said, people free to speak up, transparent, we don't hide anything. A learning culture where we use our mistakes or our near misses to be able to learn from them, and then most important, non-punitive, so that actually people should be rewarded for speaking up about problems and never worried that they're going to be punished. Here's just a few quotes that I've run into, but not admitting a mistake is a bigger mistake. This was Alan Mullally's quote, "You can't manage a secret." And then from Toyota, "No problem is problem." In the Toyota culture, when they meet, they like to hear about where they're doing well, but they focus almost exclusively on where they need to improve. And that's how they get better all the time. And their culture is, tell me your problems. If you don't tell me you have a problem, that is the biggest problem. One thing about this, when you use the word culture, it sounds like kind of a right brain type thing, sort of subjective thing, but it's actually very measurable. It's an objective type thing. And we have a survey in healthcare from the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality that measures our safety culture. And it's a validated survey, and you can repeat it from time to time to see if you're making progress or not. And it measures it in a number of domains. And then there's also a concept called just culture. I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about that, which is a way of sort of implementing this environment where people feel comfortable speaking up, and they know when there are some things that we certainly have to be held accountable for and be blamed for, but in most cases, when people bring forward mistakes, it's in the spirit of improving quality and safety. You probably can't read this real well, but this is just to let you know this survey is out there. It's on the internet. It's freely available. Some of you might find it useful, or some of the questions in your environment. But this is a survey that we administer on a regular basis at Beaumont to all of our different areas, particularly the clinical areas, and we follow the results over time. And this is what one of the reports looks like. And basically, it's just kind of a bar graph. There are about 12 different domains of safety culture, and if the bar points up and it's above the green line, that means that things are going really well in that area. If it points down and it's below the red line, there's need for improvement. So in this particular area, non-punitive response to error, which is the far right-hand bar, performing extremely well. Where they need to work, though, is management support of patient safety, which is the fourth one from the left. That's below the red line. So it gives them very specific information. And what we found is that this is a very local phenomenon. You can't do this across a whole hospital because you'll miss the subtleties and the differences between the different units. So we do it unit by unit, and we see differences between the units, and the units can learn from each other as they pull up their safety culture. We do over 300 surveys. We survey at least once a year, And then if there is an issue in a unit where the safety culture is not where it should be, we'll ask for an action plan, and then we'll repeat the survey in 6 months, and sometimes even sooner. We can do these mini surveys, which are just 4 questions that kind of give you a quick pulse on where things are at. Because if you only measure something once a year, if your plan doesn't work, you don't find out about it perhaps for a whole year, it's really set you behind. So these mini surveys, these little quick pulse surveys have helped us a lot with this. This is just an example of a surgical team. You can see when we first started doing this, this was the overall perception of safety was pretty low. The benchmark is 68% or 66% that you see there. It was only at 50%. And you can see this is, we always talk about, well, sometimes we use that word culture to describe something that's, well, this is cultural. It's impossible to change, right? You ever heard that? It is possible to change it, and we've seen this in a number of units. You can see this is one example, and those patients are safer now as a result of this because people are more comfortable speaking up than they were before, and they have what they need to do their jobs. I want to talk just for a few minutes about this concept of just culture, which is one of the ways that we implement this. And just culture is really a system for sorting things that go wrong or almost go wrong into categories and then deciding how to react to them. And there's 3 categories that are discussed in just culture: human error, at-risk behavior, and reckless behavior. And you can tell just from those words the differences between those sorts of things. We all make human errors, right? There's no way to error-proof a human being. Those things are going to happen. At-risk behavior are some of the things that we do that we know we shouldn't do, but we do it anyhow because we generally get away with it and it doesn't cause any adverse consequences. And then reckless behavior, that's a whole different topic, and those are things that we all know we shouldn't do and could lead to bad results. Here are a few examples, okay, outside of healthcare. I'm not going to ask for a show of hands that this has ever happened to you, okay, but you could see how easy it would be to do this, right? I mean, have you ever left your gas cap off, or have you ever set a cup of coffee on top of your car and gotten inside? Yep, I know I have. So that's an example of a human error. Did anybody exceed the speed limit on the way to Lawrence Tech this morning? By a few miles an hour, 2, 3, maybe 5 miles an hour. I know when I was taught to drive, I was taught, 5, that's what they give you over, so that's a safe thing to do. We all know, though, it could be risky, right? But 99 times out of 100, you're going to get away with it, and it's not a problem. So you could take that shortcut. And in healthcare, this refers to taking shortcuts, maybe because you're busy or other, there may be other reasons for it. And generally, it's not going to cause a problem. You'll be careful and all those sorts of things. But this is something we don't want to encourage this, and we need to limit this. And generally, we do that by trying to make the system safer so that you're not forced to take the shortcut. And then finally, I don't know if you can read. Can you see that okay? So that's what we would call reckless behavior. There's this slide series, I think you can find it if you Google it. It's called Why Women Live Longer Than Men. And this comes from that, okay? So this is treated entirely differently than those other 2 in a just culture. These are the 3 behaviors. We don't have time to go over them in detail, but the important point here is the sharp green line between human error and at-risk behavior. Because the way that we deal with human error is we console the individual and we try to figure out how can we prevent that error from happening to anyone in the future. For at-risk behavior, we coach people, and we also look at the system that they're operating in, and can we limit the need to carry out the at-risk behavior, because maybe you're doing it because you're too busy, or because there are things that stand in your way that are preventing you from doing your job. And so if we could take those things away, we could make it easier for you to not do that. And then we do punish reckless behavior. We also, if someone has repeated human error or at-risk behavior, the same sorts of things multiple times, that's also a different story. But we're talking about the isolated incidences here. We also have algorithms as part of the just culture, and so this particular one is for if we have a rule that's been broken in some way, and I'm not going to go through this in detail, but it allows us to sort this out, and when something happens or almost happens, we can sort it out into, you can see HE is human error, ARB at-risk behavior, and RB is reckless behavior, and we use this when we analyze events that happen to patients or almost happen to patients, errors or near misses. We use this to decide which kind of a problem is it and how do we react in terms of working with the employee that actually made the error. This took a lot of education. This was a big change. Healthcare really didn't realize that it wasn't doing this until about 1999 when the Institute of Medicine published a report that really condemned our industry for being slow to change and being based mainly on blaming and shaming instead of figuring out how to improve systems. If you look at other organizations, other industries that are much higher reliability than healthcare, things like aviation and nuclear power, these are the exact same principles that they adopted to get better. And so they charged us to educate our board and our senior leadership, our middle management and staff, and we did all of this at Beaumont. It has to start at the top. It has to be accepted at the top before you can go bring it on down to staff. We actually have a committee that meets whenever we have someone who is potentially eligible for a disciplinary action. We have a committee that meets on the phone, reviews what happened, and we go through the Just Culture algorithm to say, hey, was this really something that was reckless, or was it repetitive, at risk, or human error, or is it something where we need to look at the system of care to figure out why the problem happened, because it's going to happen to somebody else if we don't do that. And then whenever we do a root cause analysis, which is the way that we look into safety events in the hospital, we incorporate this. So Lucian Leap is one of the sort of the most important physicians in the whole patient safety movement. He's a surgeon at Harvard. And he said the single greatest impediment to error prevention in the medical industry is that we punish people for making mistakes. Because when you do that, you drive error reporting underground, right? People are going to not surface those errors, and you're not surfacing and you're not solving the root causes of those problems. You're just dealing with an individual. Sooner or later, it's going to pop up with someone else. This is something I'm really proud of. This is our entire organization and our score on the non-punitive response to error question on the Safety Culture Survey. And you can see we went from a very low score in 2010, and we still have a way to go, but we got up to 48%, which is above the benchmark. Over time, using these things that I just told you about, making it safe to speak up, incorporating this into our error-solving processes and those sorts of things. So people are getting more and more comfortable. We're on a nice trajectory now. I'd like to touch next on the subject of data. And you all know W. Edwards Deming, sort of the father of the quality improvement movement. I think this quote is generally attributed to him, although I've seen it attributed to others before. But we rely heavily on data in our industry, and I'm sure you do as well. We actually have this thing, trying to categorize. Remember I told you we have 2,000 things. Actually, it's more than 2,000 that we have to worry about. And we used to have to, hunt and search for all these different things. Some of them would be over here, some would be in this department. We created this giant tool that organizes and categorizes everything that we care about in one place. And somebody actually in one of my former organizations nicknamed it The Matrix after the movie. Did you all see that movie, The Matrix? You remember how, when you get in there, you can kind of get lost. It's really huge. It's full of bits and bytes and that sort of thing. So that name sort of stuck. It traveled from Indiana to Michigan with me, and we still call it the quality matrix to this very day. And it allows us to be able to basically keep track of our entire health system's metrics in a single location. To get onto the matrix, it has to be something that's important. So if it's just sort of a nice to do, it's probably not going to get it on here because, like I said, there's 2,000 things that are on here for a good reason. So it has to be important to patient care and or to external entities. We are a highly regulated industry, as some of you probably are as well, and you have a lot of different things, and we do too, that other people are looking at. And as you know, you can go on the internet now and you can look at a lot of different quality metrics on hospitals and health systems. And so that's how we get it on. It has to be measurable, and we always benchmark it against best practices elsewhere. We score every measurement on this quality matrix on a 4-point scale. We also use smiley faces and frowny faces and stuff like that, but we have this 4-point scale behind it. And if it's below average compared to the external benchmarks, it gets a 1. It gradually moves up. We use 90th percentile, meaning that we're better than all but 10% of hospitals as our top. That's where we strive to be for all of our clinical quality metrics, is better than the 90th percentile, and that would get you a 4 or a smiley face. And then this is what it looks like on the inside, and basically every one of those 2,000 measures is laid out there, and this is a cardiac measure. It shows you when it was measured, what the score is, where it currently is at, what is our goal for the measure. It has the names of the people that are accountable to have a plan to improve it if it needs to be improved, and it even has a short synopsis on the far right of what the plan is to improve the measure. And we use this in an automated sort of way. If anything drops down in terms of its performance, it gets pushed out to the accountable folks so that they're aware of it. And then we ask them to resubmit a plan, and then we have various committees and groups that follow the progress of this. We can also aggregate all of our data together. So remember, everything's scored on a 1, 2, 3, or 4 basis, and we just simply average all of those, and we can break this down by department. I think this one is this is the whole Royal Oak Beaumont Hospital, just kind of looking at overall progress, and we're looking to see, has the score improved over the year, meaning that we're making overall progress in our plan to improve quality and safety. And then we set targets for each of these. So what it lets us do is it helps us to juggle all these different measurements. We have lots of people that work out in the clinical and non-clinical areas. We distribute the wealth, so to speak, so we don't have anybody that has 500 of these measures. Most areas might have anywhere from 5, 10, maybe 20 or 30 at the most. And by distributing it out to lots of different areas and getting activity going on at the grassroots level, when it all adds up, it's able to be improved. And then we're able, like I said, to break this down all the way down to the department or unit level, or roll it up. So our board of directors, for example, likes to look at it for the whole system or hospital by hospital, but each of our nursing units has their own score that they can use to monitor their own progress. The other thing I wanted to just mention today, I'm just curious, how many of you, raise your hand if you're familiar with control charts or SPC charts? A few of you are. Okay, good. Light's really bright up here. I wanted to point this out because a lot of places aren't familiar with this, and we found this to be incredibly useful in terms of working with our data. And the main thing that it lets you do that other methods don't is, as we all know, if you flip a coin 100 times, it's not always going to land up 50 heads and 50 tails, right? You're going to have a certain amount of normal variation in that. And that's true of all data that you may collect for any purpose. There's going to be a certain amount of normal variation. And we have a tendency sometimes to overinterpret that data, and if we see it go up or down for a month or two, we may get worried or we may breathe a sigh of relief. And this puts rigor around that, and it prevents you from overreacting to that normal variation and calling it special variation, which would be something that you should worry about, that you should react to. So it can also very accurately and graphically answer the question, have we actually improved or worsened, or are we just seeing noise in the process? So here's an example from healthcare. So CABG is coronary artery bypass grafting surgery. It's open heart surgery, for coronary disease. And this was a hospital, this wasn't us, but a different hospital that had a 5% mortality rate for the CABG procedure, which is pretty high, okay? And they were concerned, and so they put a new protocol in to treat patients for that. And the next time period, they saw that the mortality had dropped to 4%. It's good, isn't it? Well, it is when you look at it this way, but let's put this in a graphical form, and in this case, you wouldn't even need a control chart. Any graph would do. But if you look at that, see the vertical line there in the middle? Yeah, I have a pointer right here. So here's where the new protocol was implemented. This is time period 1, and this is time period 2. So what was happening? Well, during time period 1, yes, it did average 5% mortality, but actually the mortality was dropping, wasn't it? And now they put the new protocol in place. What happened to the mortality? Went back up, right? Now, it only averaged 4%, but yet it still is higher. So when you look at it this way, you say it worked. When you look at it this way, it's pretty clear it didn't. The person that taught me this had this great analogy. I'll share it with you. But he said, imagine up here in the front of the room, we had 2 buckets. We had one, I'm going to put my left foot in a bucket of scalding hot water, and I'm going to put my right foot in a bucket of ice cold water. On average, I am very comfortable. Okay? So watch out for averages. At least look at your data over time, and the control charts lend even more specificity to this. Who did you say did your bypass surgery? No. Oh. So how about this? Here's a graph, right? This is something that if it's higher is better. That's all you really need to know about this graph. Does anybody do graphs like this? They put a trend line through it or a regression line through it. Your conclusion, it's getting better, right? You put the same data on a control chart. This is exactly the same data. What you see is actually there was 1 month. You see the circle up there? That means there was something special that happened that month. 1 month back towards in the beginning of the first year where that happened. The rest of the time, what are you seeing? Normal variation. So this process actually has not improved. This way of looking at it makes you think it has. This way tells you the truth. It hasn't improved. You need to keep working on it if it needs to go up. So this is what we use control charts for at Beaumont. We graph a lot of our data, both our clinical and non-clinical data, this way to help us to tell whether we've improved or not. This is also something you can avoid if you use them, but overreacting to short-term changes in results. 1 month down does not a trend make, and this makes it very, very clear. The software actually puts a circle on things that are special automatically for you. There's certain tests that it has. And we talked about this because obviously the approach is very different. You don't want to overreact to something that's just normally bouncing up and down unless you're not happy with the overall result, in which case you should act on it, but you don't want to overreact to 1 or 2 months based on that. This says, oddly enough, that was the one time I asked the magic 8-ball. So it avoids that. And then this is a great book if you want to read more about this, Understanding Variation, the Key to Managing Chaos. He said, control charts, the simplest way to filter out the noise which is present in all data sets. The failure to use control charts is one of the best ways known to man to increase costs, waste effort, and lower morale. Okay, so don't ask me how I feel about it. No, just kidding. But very, very helpful tool, and any data that can be looked at over time can be done on this type of a chart. So the last thing I want to talk about is this concept of continuous daily improvement that we use. And I'll warn you, this is the hardest one to do in lecture format. It's something you almost have to see to understand, but I'm going to do my best to describe it to you here today. And I'll start with this Confucius quote, "The man who moves a mountain begins by carrying away small stones." And this really embodies the concepts of what you're going to see. You're going to see a lot of small stones that we overturn in the name of paving the way to quality improvement. And hopefully you'll be able to make the connection at the end. So we had a different approach to improvement at Beaumont before, and we used to use a lot of committees, and we had to prioritize our scarce quality resources that we would deploy to different areas. We would do a lot of classroom training and quality improvement where we would pull people off-site and teach them in a room how to do it, and using certain tools and things like that. And then we would also really rely a lot on trained performance improvement experts to do our work. So that, and there were a limited number of those folks, and we would deploy them to different areas. We used a lot of data. Sometimes we would spend months analyzing data before we would do anything, and it would take a long time. And then we also had the impression that once we figured it out in one area, we could just sort of spread that like peanut butter to other areas, and it would work just as well there. We've really changed a lot of this over the last 5 or 6 years at Beaumont, and our new approach, instead of the committees, basically people or improvements are pulled to an area for a project based on the business need, and we don't necessarily tell people what they can and can't do anymore. In fact, we rarely do that. And in place of the classroom training, all of it is learned by doing. We have about a 15, 20-minute orientation for new participants where we teach them a few very basic things, and then they're out on the floor under the supervision of trained coaches that help them to learn this actually by doing it in a safe environment. Instead of the trained PI experts, all of this is happening using frontline staff, frontline management with the assistance of coaches that help them to learn how to do it. We still use data, but now it's more for prioritizing projects. We don't spend months analyzing it anymore. The data basically tells us where we need to go, and then we improve things using these methods. It's really sped things up quite a bit because we make a lot of changes, and I'll show you some examples of this in the moment based on direct observation of the work, generally small changes. And then in the place of the best practices spread to everywhere, this is a quote from one of our managers that was an early adopter of all of this, but he said, "There is no best practice, only better." Because even though you think you've reached the pinnacle, it's always possible to improve something. And the way that you've done it in one nursing unit may be a little bit different in another nursing unit. There may be other ways to make it work better. So one of the key things that we did when we started doing this was establish some rules for change that freed people up to be able to do stuff, because people were used to having to ask permission before they could make changes. And so these were the 4 rules that we came up with. We said, if anyone has an idea that is low cost, low risk to quality and safety, easy to implement, and easy to reverse, we call this low, low, easy, easy, okay? They must be allowed to try it. No one can tell them that they can't try that idea. And we'll do that in an environment where we can try it and watch it to see how it works. And if it doesn't work, it's easy to reverse. We can always pull it back out. The term we use to describe this, some of you may have heard this, is Kaizen, which is a Japanese word. And basically, it's a change towards the better is a way of describing it, or some of these other definitions. But it's a way of making small incremental changes that get you to an ultimate goal. And an analogy I'll give you is, are there any sailors in the crowd at all? Anybody sail? A few of you have. Okay, so here's a question for the sailors. Which way can a sailboat not sail directly? Into the wind. Thank you very much. That's correct. So if you're at the sailboat here at the bottom of this slide, you have to do something called tacking, which means going back and forth in order to get to the spot that's into the wind. You can't go directly from point A to point B. And Kaizen is a lot like that. You know where you want to go. You have a target that you're aiming for. You're not going to be able to directly get from point A to point B in a lot of cases because it's just too big of a jump to get there. And so instead, you tack. You kind of go back and forth from your current condition towards your target condition. And as long as the Kaizen idea gets you a little closer to that target, then you should try it. Okay, so for example, one of the targets that we have that we use a lot at Beaumont is nursing time at the bedside. How much time does a nurse actually spend in the room with the patient, caring for the patient, versus other things that they have to do, like going to gather supplies or interruptions and those sorts of things. And we try to very gradually increase that, because there's not only one or two reasons why they can't spend more time at the bedside. There's hundreds, maybe thousands of reasons, each of which are little. Together they add up to big things. And we say that 1,000 small Kaizen are worth more than one Kaizen worth 1,000. The reason we say that is that even if you could figure out a way to get from point A to point B in one fell swoop, the process of getting there is very instructive. It teaches people how to be very aware of their situations and find these little small things that can interfere with quality, interfere with safety, interfere with efficiency, and stamp them out, because there's an endless supply of these things. And I guarantee you, in whatever business that you're in, you have the same thing too. It's usually not big things, it's a combination of small things. And the learning that gets into this, as I'll mention in a minute, that's the most important part. The president of our Royal Oak Hospital actually came up with his team with this quality improvement philosophy, and I'm not going to go into it in great detail, but remember how I said we had 2,000 quality metrics? So about 600 or 700 of those belong to the Royal Oak Hospital. When we thought about it, though, the vast majority of those metrics would be better if we could work on just two things that you see on the left-hand side: patient flow and human efficiency. Patient flow is when people are waiting and things are not happening at the time that they should. That's not good for the patient, it's not good for us. So we work on things that help move people faster and more safely through the system. And human efficiency is how do we spend more time as people caring for our patients and less time doing busy work and doing the things that really aren't value added to patient care. So those two things together, always keeping the patient at the center of that, that's what patient-centered actions are, lead to improvement in all of the different quality metrics. The vast majority of them, and efficiency and economic metrics, will respond to improvements in those two things. So we work, and our Kaizen targets are generally focused on both of those things: patient flow and human efficiency. So here's an example. The first unit that ever got involved with this was a unit called 5 North, a pretty big unit, 80 beds, had a brand new manager, was very eager to try some things because he had like the worst unit in the hospital. It had very low patient satisfaction scores, their quality scores were not very good, there was lots of room for improvement. And when we actually looked at how much time the nurses were spending at the bedside caring for patients, it was 23%. And actually, that may kind of shock you if you're not in healthcare, but that's about on par with national averages. Nurses have a lot of tasks to do that are not direct patient care tasks, and that's what we found when we started working on this unit. And so the way we began this work was simply having team members following a nurse and looking at what's preventing them from spending more time with the patient. Simple question. And I guarantee you put on scrubs, come to any hospital and do this for an hour or two, you'll need multiple pieces of paper to catalog all of the different things. And many of these things are amenable to these quick Kaizen improvements that you can do. So these were some of the things that we found in our work. Missing equipment and supplies was very high on the list. Lots of interruptions. Medicines were missing. We had people arriving from patient transportation. The folks that push the stretchers and take you from your room down to X-ray would come, but the patient was eating breakfast, or the patient was maybe off at another test or otherwise occupied, so they had to go back and come back later. And there were many, many, many others. And I'll just show you a couple of quick examples. So this was one where the observation was that the nurse went into the medication room. She needed to split a pill in half to be able to give it to the patient. There was no pill cutter there, so she had to walk to actually 2 other medication rooms before she found the pill cutter she needed. And this was just sort of part of her regular day, something that happened all the time. Didn't think much of it, but we had someone watching her that day. It actually happened to be me. So our Kaizen was to anchor the pill cutter, which you can see in red on the right there, to the wall with a little thin wire. So the pill cutter's always in that room now, and they liked that so much they ended up doing it with the scissors and the pill crusher, which were 2 other implements that often would disappear. And then you never have to worry about this anymore. It's always going to be there, okay? Another problem that we found was certain patients that are bedbound that can't get out of bed or turn themselves have to be turned every couple of hours to decrease their risk of developing pressure sores, you know, these little ulcers that develop, bed sores. And it was hard to remember, though, well, when is it time to turn the patient and that sort of thing. And so what they did was they created this turning clock that you see down here at the bottom. And so basically what this is saying is that at noon, this patient needs to be turned into a supine position, which means flat on their back and that sort of thing. And then 2 hours from then, they're going to be turned on their right side. 2 hours from that, they'll be turned supine again, then to their left side and then back. And so this gives you a visual clue, and if you're going by this room and it's about noon, you know this patient needs this, and when you do it, you turn it to 2 o'clock so that you know when it's time to do it the next time. And they even improved this. Later, they realized that even with this, it was possible to miss it, so they created turn teams that every 2 hours, they would assemble a couple of people that would just go around to each of the rooms that have this and do it. Get it done, turn the clock, and then move on. And that got them to 100% in terms of being able to move the patients like they should. So this started in 1 nursing unit, and the hospital I'm talking about here is a 1,000-bed hospital. It's rather large, but then it quickly connected because we found, as I mentioned, there were problems with patient transportation, medication, so we connected to other areas that then also began to do improvement work in their areas to help to serve the nursing unit better. And over time, we ended up connecting to pretty much the whole hospital and even some of the business areas and our other hospitals. And some of the quality indicators that improved this pressure ulcers, which were a problem on this unit, they went for quite a period of time with no ulcers at all, thanks to the turning team. And our nursing time at the bedside went from 23% up to 63%, so essentially tripled as a result of eliminating, none of these were big things, they were all small, but eliminating these interruptions, distractions, and the things that were keeping the nurses from being with their patients more. The thing that is really amazing is that as this has reached out to the rest of the hospital, it's had hospital-wide results. So we started on 1 unit, it began to spread, and now pretty much everyone is doing this. And so some of the things that we monitor for the whole hospital are things like our overall mortality rate, which obviously lower is better. And the red line is us. The upper line are the groups of large, well-known teaching hospitals that we compare ourselves against. And you can see we were better than them to start with, but we've been able to keep that consistent gap, even though all hospitals are getting better now, but we've been able to get better faster and maintain that gap. This is our patient satisfaction rating. It's still not in the green zone, but it's definitely in the right track. And this is cost, and we're the lower and the other hospitals are the upper, and we've been able to essentially eliminate the effects of inflation because as you do, you know, for those of you that are students of quality, doing things right the first time, doing it better, actually is lower cost because you're eliminating a lot of the rework that goes into it, and so we've been able to essentially not see the inflationary changes that our other hospitals that we compare ourselves have been seeing. Our length of stay, how long people remain in the hospital has also gone down quite a bit, which is nice. It's great for the patients and families. Who wants to stay in a hospital 1 day longer than you need to? And economically, this is a nice thing for us too. We've also done quite a bit of work in our emergency department. It used to be it took on average a little over half an hour for a doctor to see you, and now it's down to about 16, 17 minutes as a result of, again, lots of little reasons why this wasn't happening. So that gives you just kind of a high-level perspective on some of the things that we've been doing with this continuous daily improvement philosophy. This is not a program, this is not a set of tools that we just rolled out, that we named anything in particular. It's really just a new approach to how we do quality improvement. And it's a very, very long working approach because it's based on developing people. When we teach people to do this, we're doing it to get work done, but we're especially doing it to teach them how to do these simple, continuous daily improvements in their daily work, because we realize that with over 2,000 things that we might need to work on, that if we don't have this capability out, among the front lines with their management teams and their frontline staff, we have no hope of success, because no matter how big your quality department is, you're never going to have enough people to resource such a big thing. And I mean, think about it now. We've just grown from 3 hospitals to 8 hospitals. So it was impossible with 3. It would be extremely impossible with 8 hospitals. So people development, what it's about. Continuous daily improvement is the vision, where it happens every day, every place, by everyone. This takes a lot of management commitment because it's about people development and culture. It's not a quick fix. It's not something that you can roll out in a series of meetings in 1 or 2 months. It's very important that you have the clear set of objectives that everyone is working to, so that they're not just doing random acts of improvement. So for us, the patient flow and human efficiency, those are the 2 that we always strive towards. We found the low, easy thing to be extremely helpful to free people from sort of the bonds, if you will, of having to ask permission to do stuff, because most of our frontline folks really felt like they had to ask their manager's permission, or maybe even go up through several hospital committees before they could make some of these improvements. We go out every week and we check on progress. We visit different areas. We ask them to show us what Kaizens they've done. And what makes us feel good is if there are things that they have done that we knew nothing about, that had nothing to do with us as the coaches for this, that's how we know that a unit has reached the point where they're able to sustain this on their own. You have to push people. People are very uncomfortable the first time or 2 that they do these things. It's very, very difficult. We actually used a factory down in Ohio for some of the initial work that we did with this, where we took people really out of their comfort zone down to a manufacturing plant where they do this sort of thing. And they did this on the assembly line to kind of show them, yes, you can. Even in a place that you've never been before, you can watch carefully, you can see something that's getting in the way of the work, and you can help it to get better. It takes top executive support. I love to show this slide. This is Mr. Steve Howard, who was the chairman of the Beaumont Health System Board of Directors, with scrubs on in the emergency room doing a Kaizen. Okay, his Kaizen is still there, by the way. So remember I said at the beginning, sweating the small stuff? So you guys remember this book? It's kind of old, Don't Sweat the Small Stuff. So I couldn't disagree with this more. I would have to retitle this, Do Sweat the Small Stuff, because what we've been doing and what we've seen really is helping our patients to get better care is all about sweating the small stuff. And I want to tell you just 2 quick stories. I think we still have time. About some things. Some of these things may be hard to connect directly to patient safety and quality, but I want to tell you these 2 stories that have really come as an outgrowth or as a result of this continuous daily improvement philosophy. So this is, you've seen this, right? You can buy these in the drug. These are alcohol swabs. We use these all the time to clean patients' sites for starting IVs. We clean off their catheters before we inject medication to prevent horrible life-threatening infections. And this was, for many years, this is what the alcohol swab that came to Beaumont looked like, in this nice blue lettering. One day, the alcohol swabs, if you read the label on this, this is the exact same product as this, just a different brand, and it has a different label on it, right? One day they started coming like this. A very alert supply clerk, the person that delivers the supplies to the patient floors, noticed this, and also noticed that the one on the left, which is the alcohol pad, looked very similar to the nail polish remover pad, and it was stocked in bins that were side by side on the nursing units. Now, that's a very different chemical on the right there. You would not want to use that to clean off skin before starting an IV or to clean a line, because it would not disinfect it properly. In fact, it could even hurt the patient. And this supply technician, who had been very involved in this work, in noticing the small stuff that makes a difference, alerted the supply area to this. We immediately pulled the different pads out, and we made it safe again so that people wouldn't confuse these, because you can bet that people's eyes would deceive them and they could pull the wrong pad very easily. And then another example, this is a surgical pack. And this is, inside of this pack are surgical instruments that are used for operations. And in this case, these are the instruments that are used to do knee replacement surgery. If you were to lift this pack, it weighs something like 30 pounds. It's very heavy. It has these big, knee replacement's kind of like carpentry. I don't want to scare you if you've never had one, and you might have one, but it's very much like tool time. And a lot of the tools are inside of here. And one day, we were in an operating room, and we were working on a Kaizen project to try to improve patient flow through the operating room. And the person that sets up the surgical instruments is called the scrub technician. And she does a process on every one of these packs when they come into the operating room to inspect the outer wrapping, which is the blue wrapping, to see if there are any tears in it. Because if there are tears in it, it means they sterilize these instruments and wrap them to prevent bacteria from entering them so that they're safe to use on the patient. Any tears could compromise the sterility. And lo and behold, and this was a small person, she's lifting this 30-pound pack up and looking, and she sees a little tiny tear on the bottom of the pack. Says, no big deal. She calls the supply room, and they say, I need another pack, and she sends that one back. About 10 minutes later, they bring another pack up. She does the same thing, inspects it. Lo and behold, there's a little tiny tear, very, very small, and she detects it there. She calls them again. They bring another one. Thank goodness it's the last one that they have on the shelf, and it was fine, and the case proceeded. So in a normal environment where you didn't sweat the small stuff, what would typically happen is that would be the end of it. They'd re-sterilize the two, and no one really asked a lot of questions. But in a Kaizen environment, in a continuous daily improvement environment where you do sweat the small stuff, we went to the supply room where these things are kept. And what we saw, and I wish I had a picture of the before, what we saw was that these were kept on shelves. Remember, they weigh about 30 pounds. And at the end of the shelf, the side that you pull the pack out, were little plastic tags that labeled to say what was inside the pack behind there so you'd know what it was. That little tag was just slightly above the level of the shelf. And it was really easy to see. If you weren't very careful and lifted and pulled that out, if you just pulled it out, that little tag could have easily snagged the outer wrapping of this and caused a tear, and you'd end up with the situation that we had. So that's what happened, and we looked, and that same situation was in place in many areas on the supply shelf. So what we did immediately was to change that labeling system so it wasn't protruding. And that's what you can see here now. If you look here, the tags now are really, the plastic is gone, it's just a little label. And then when I asked them to take a picture of this later, I'd seen that they had done something even more in addition to that. Now, after they wrap and sterilize the instruments, they also put a plastic outer wrap on there to even further minimize the chance that anything could happen to the outer wrap. And now the incidence of little tiny tears in that pack are essentially non-existent. But imagine what would happen if that alert scrub technician hadn't noticed that little tiny tear. That could have presented a risk that would have been unknown, and if the patient had gotten an infection later, there would be no way to trace it back to the beginning. And the same thing with the alcohol swabs. So teaching people to do this has a side benefit of making them very aware of their situation and very reluctant to overlook problems that can turn into patient safety issues. And when you get your whole team doing this every day, your chances of finding things and fixing them before they become a problem go up quite a bit. So this is, some of you may have read some articles and books by Josh Linkner. He's a local columnist and consultant. But he says, let's stop waiting for the big bang of sudden change. Wishful thinking is not a winning strategy. Instead, pursue the measured approach of systematically delivering on the small things. You'll soon find the big things are revealed over time in the same way a sculptor's work takes form after chiseling away consistently. Does that make sense? I'm going to end with this. This is generally attributed to Ben Franklin, so this is not modern at all. And it's called For the Want of a Nail. For the want of a nail, the shoe was lost. For the want of the shoe, the horse was lost. For the want of a horse, the rider was lost. For the want of a rider, the message was lost. For the want of a message, the battle was lost. For the want of a battle, the kingdom was lost. All for the want of a horseshoe nail. So what does that say? What does that mean in relation to what you've just seen? Anybody? And Dennis, you can move the microphone around if you want. Maybe we bring the lights up too so I can actually say, oh, hi, there's people here. Anybody care to? Sweat the small stuff, right, right. Exactly. Because think about the person that's in charge of the horseshoe nail, right? That person will never know that the fact that he or she did a great job attaching that horseshoe prevented the kingdom from being lost, right? Absolutely no way of knowing. They just know that they need to do their job carefully and correctly and not overlook the small problems that might prevent them to do it. And then also, think about this on the tail end. How are you ever, as the king sat in the room afterwards trying to deconstruct the reason that the kingdom was lost, who's ever going to figure out that the horseshoe nail was the root cause? It's impossible. So there's no way to attack this from the end of this. It has to be attacked from the beginning, and that's why I think we should be sweating the small stuff. So that's all. formally, but I'd be happy to take any questions. It's really been fun being with you today. Oh. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Dr. Flanders. Questions for Dr. Flanders? And while that microphone is going down there, I'm going to date myself. Someone left this out there, and I don't know what it is, but it's mechanical. It's a little MP3 player. Did someone leave one out there? My 18-year-old will like it.
Oh, yeah, it's yours now, Dennis.
I came here from Houston. I was there for 7 years, and University of Texas, Austin, has a Center for Management Studies at the Houston Medical Center. As you know, it's the largest medical center, if I'm right, in the United States. And a friend of mine was teaching there. He has PhD in management from Minnesota. And I asked her, what do you do here? And he told me that one of the major problems we have is the fact that medical doctors have no idea about human resource management. So in surgery rooms, the behavior is very much like structured. And I'm wondering whether, and of course, you know, most medical doctors, you know, don't take courses in management, human resource management. What are you doing, you know, to address, you know, issues like that?
Yeah, that is a fantastic question, because that is so important in especially building. I think I mentioned the term collegial interactive team at least once during the talk, but the ability for people to work together in a culture and environment where people are comfortable speaking up and they work together as a team, because no one is perfect. No one, no matter how strong their training and no matter how well they are conditioned, is going to see everything. So we do things, and this is actually something that this whole state of Michigan pioneered through this initiative called the Keystone Initiative through the Michigan Hospital Association. But we actually use some structured briefing tools in the operating rooms, and all hospitals in the state. In fact, most across the country do this now. And it starts out with everyone introducing themselves so that they know each other, because sometimes you're working with new people that you haven't worked with before. And you go through in a structured way and you ask questions like, are there any concerns from the anesthesiologist about the anesthetic management of the patient? Might we need blood for this patient? And if so, do we have it in the room? And there's a whole series of questions. We do the same thing at the end of the case called the debriefing, about what went well, what could we improve if there were any issues. And that sort of, it's a little bit forced, and if you do it in a routinized manner, it's not as effective, but it really has bonded the teams together very well, and it's patterned after aviation. Because this, in the cockpit, that's exactly what they've taught the pilots to do, and they've taught the pilots how to, you know, unleash their whole crew. It's not just the captain anymore. It's not. There's a great guest speaker. We actually showed him to our board yesterday, but you know, he talks about airline captains of the past being like Captain Kirk from Star Trek. Remember? Yeah, you know, he was in command. He was in control. He made all the decisions, and it's real different now. And so that's the path that we're on to try to get at that. Because you're right, we don't get that in our medical training, but you know. Our students now, our medical students and our residents that are going to be the next generation of doctors are getting that now through the work that we're doing in the hospitals. Great question.
Great. Other questions? Tony?
Sam, very great presentation. I really enjoyed it. So when you went to medical school, I don't think you probably weren't focused on quality classes to become a pediatrician. And in social work, it's kind of the same thing with social workers. I think, you know, we're going to be working with people individually or more of a macro social work. And I do some teaching at the University of Michigan, and there's not really any classes on quality. It's, you know, referred to now and then. But yet, when we hire people, you know, we hire MSWs to lead the quality effort. Mm-hmm. You're a doctor leading the quality effort. How did your learning to get into this field happen? And is it being addressed in medical school now to get people on this track?
It's a great question. You know, first of all, it wasn't when I went to school. As you said, there was none of this. It wasn't really even known. It was really 1999 when that Institute of Medicine report came out that I mentioned before, when a lot of this began in healthcare, even though it had been going on in industry for much longer than that. Personally, my story is that I was in full-time medical practice in Indianapolis, and I gradually became involved in some administrative work through my job, and one day they offered to send a bunch of us doctors that were doing a little administrative work into to do a retreat in our blue jeans in the woods, a 2-day retreat on quality. And that was a life changer for me, because the guy that taught that class taught us about W. Edwards Deming and his theories, and I realized as I listened to him that the answer to a lot of the problems that I was experiencing in our large group medical practice could be solved by doing this, and I wanted to get more and more involved, and that's kind of how I got on the path that I'm on right now. So for me, it was a class that changed it, but I'll tell you my viewpoint, and this is just me, and I'm sure there'd be a lot of people that would disagree with me. I don't think you can learn this in classroom training, and I'll give you an example of why I think that way. I actually have a class that I teach on this. It's a full-day course. It's 8 hours. It includes practical experience, with trying to solve problems. And at my last healthcare organization, we actually trained, I think we were up to 4,000 or 5,000 of our 8,000 folks had come through this class. We would do it in large ballrooms, like in downtown hotels, train 400 or 500 people at a time after we got it going. We trained the senior management team. We did all of that, and we taught a lot of these same principles in the classroom, but then when people got back to the work site, nothing happened. Their managers didn't really get it, and so now my feeling is the only way you can learn this is by doing it. You have to get out there under the guidance of somebody that knows how to do it, and it almost needs to be passed on like a craft, where you teach somebody on the front line, because we have just not seen people take the classroom learning and be able to apply it effectively. But you get them out doing Kaizens with their manager or with a coach that knows how to do this. After a few times they get it, and then they're able to continue to do it. So that's my recommendation. I still teach my class sometimes. I do actually teach it to our residents and our medical students, but we also involve, each and every one of them gets involved now in doing this hands-on activity at least a little bit, because we think that they're really going to get it that way.
Other questions up front?
What do you recommend in an organization that's maybe traditionally more hierarchical versus? Thank you. Because this somewhat to the question earlier about the physicians being in a hierarchical position, perhaps. What should an organization do if somebody in this audience wants to maybe make this happen in the organization, but it's currently hierarchical?
That's a great question. By the way, these are 2 plants from Beaumont in the front here. These are my colleagues, Sharon, Cal, and Paul Levike, that both work. We all work together in our quality department. I appreciate you guys coming today. It's very nice of you. So, this is not an easy thing to get started in. You have to have someone, on your team or willing to come into your team that will help you to get it started. But the best thing is to just get out there and try stuff. The low, easy rule, I think, has been one of the most impactful things. Our hospital president thought that up at Royal Oak. Low risk to quality and safety, low cost, easy to implement, easy to reverse. The rule is, if your idea fits those 4 things, you can just try it. That's been the one concept, I think, that has really enabled more people to do more stuff and feel more comfortable doing those sorts of things. So I'd encourage you to think about using that and making it safe for people to try stuff, with that construct back at your place. But you just have to get out and start doing things. And remember that, when you get in a room and try to plan the perfect solution for something from soup to nuts, it's oftentimes we end up with a very large diagram and a year-long project that can, sometimes fail at the very end. Break it down into small little parts and just be happy if you can tack that sailboat just a little closer to the windward side. And as you do that little by little and you get frontline folks more involved with this, it just sort of organically happens. And you reach a tipping point where because people love to do this. They are enthusiastic. If you came, we have a group, we have about 10 different floors right now at the hospital doing this right now. They did it yesterday and today. And they report out at the end of the day, and the energy and the enthusiasm is like nothing I've ever seen. It's really fun to watch. And then seeing it translate into their daily work is really the goal.
Oh, hi. There's a big culture change happening in healthcare. I'm sure you know this week they announced the Health and Human Services that pay for performance is going to ramp up. So quality is going to play a huge role, and I guess I just want to understand how that's going to affect you and how that's going to affect Beaumont or just the industry in general.
Yeah, it is enormous. For those of you that aren't familiar, we have a large amount of our revenue at risk. The actual figure for Beaumont Health, our new system, it's $128 million of bottom line net revenue at risk today based on quality performance in the hospitals. The announcement you're referring to was that Health and Human Services, which sponsors the Medicare and Medicaid programs, announced that they're going to take that from where it's at right now and over the next 5, 6, 7 years, ramp that up to where up to 90% of our revenue from those payers will be dependent on our performance, not just on how many things we do, which is the way it is right now. So what it's going to do is put this work on steroids. It's going to be, the 17 years that it takes on average to reach best practice is going to be decimated. It should be decimated because there'll be no way that you can keep up with this because now it's nuclear. That announcement, I think, is going to be a tipping point from the regulators that it's going to force us to go even faster.
Others?
Well, I have one. I can ask. We talked earlier in talking about the quality. It's impacted by the hospital, it's impacted by the doctors, and then it's impacted by the patients. So if someone gets readmitted, I'm sure that's going to impact a lot of the social service agencies too. Somebody, you come in, you treat them, they go out, and then they have to come back for some other. Like, what will you be looking at to do from the patient side of things to help that so that you don't get that readmittance or those people coming back to the organization?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, we had this discussion. One of the more frustrating performance metrics that we have in the hospital industry is trying to prevent patients from being readmitted, which is a great goal, right? And the readmission rates for different diseases can be as high as 20 or 25% of the patients come back within 30 days of when they leave. It's very complicated, though, because like Tony's an expert at this. This is what he does. But there are many factors that control that readmission. Some of it are things that we do in the hospital. If we send someone home too soon on the wrong medications without good follow-up and those sorts of things, that can cause a readmission. But it can also be caused by social factors, by psychiatric factors, by people that can't afford to get their medications and those sorts of things. What we're doing, and unfortunately there's been a lot of scientific work to try to come up with the formula for doing this. What is the magic formula that you can do? What are the 5 or 6 things that help to do this? And so far every study has failed in a controlled way to produce a true impact. At least published studies have failed. So what we're doing is experimenting with lots of different things. With outreach to patients after they go home, we do a lot of phone calls. We fill prescriptions before patients leave, if they'll let us, so that we know that they walk out with their medication. We make sure they have their follow-up appointments. We have pharmacists, we have nurses, we have all people, so it's forced us to really extend our reach beyond the 4 walls of the hospital. We've had some mixed success with this. Some of the things have worked a little, but we haven't found the silver bullet either, so that's something we're going to keep working on. Right now, 3% of our Medicare revenue is at risk based on our readmission rate for Medicare, so we're highly incentivized to do this, and it is the right thing to do. People coming back to the hospital is not a good thing, but it's a tough problem, and some of the things, that we're all human beings, and unfortunately, for example, the mortality rate, last time I checked, of the human race is 100% eventually. And so we can't prevent every death. Some deaths happen, but do they have to happen in the hospital? Are there ways, kinder, gentler ways to help people at end of life? It's forcing us to explore a lot of these different things that we weren't having to do before. And even though it's uncomfortable, though, and this is just my editorial opinion, it's uncomfortable, it's financially uncomfortable, all of these things are the right thing to do because it's really aligning us with our patients' best interests. And if your car mechanic was paid by the number of times that the car had to come into the shop, even if they didn't fix it right the first time, you wouldn't be very happy with your car mechanic. So we need to do everything we can do to be able to prevent these untoward outcomes, recognizing that we can't control everything. And that's really the mission that we're on.
Any other questions?
Oh. Question.
Yep.
It has nothing to do with your presentation or me. What's your opinion of what, now it's been almost 3 years, Obama healthcare. What is your assessment as a medical doctor?
Oh my gosh, a political question, yeah.
Okay, we're out of time now.
But, it's a mixed bag. There's no perfect answer to this. The things that I like about it, though, is the fact that we have, and it's less and less, but millions of uninsured people in the most, the best industrialized country in the free world or whatever. However, that's unacceptable. And there are many other countries that have been able to solve that problem. So that's the part about it that I really like. I actually do like that a lot of the provisions in the law are holding us accountable for our outcomes and not just for how much that we do. I think that that is good. You know, the double-edged sword is sometimes it's hard to measure the stuff that we can control versus the stuff that we can't, so we have to work on that, and that's tense. So there's some positive things in it. You know, all of the, you know, I don't know how many thousands of pages. I haven't even read the whole thing. I don't even think we all know everything that it means yet, but there's some good stuff that's come out of it so far. And anything, I mean, and I'm sure I'm biased being in the quality field of work, but anything that helps to push us along towards doing better care and not just more care, I think is a good thing.
Any other questions? No? Well, I'd like to thank Dr. Flanders for what I thought was an outstanding presentation.